to see on the screen as I talk is loggerhead turtles. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the beach and you have been so blessed as to see perhaps a nest of loggerhead turtle babies that the nest starts to break open and these tiny little turtles do what they know to do. They go to the sea. There's this innate kind of homing system that they have inside of them. It's this hunger born deep within them, and they just begin to move their way to the beach. It's astonishing. These loggerhead turtles are probably no more than 2 inches, and there might be hundreds of them clustered in this nest deep in the sand. And somehow when the time is right and the temperature is right, these little turtles start to poke through and the sand just kind of caves in and they actually climb on each other's backs. And they move up. And then they start to move to the sea. Now, as you're going to see hopefully in the video that's going to follow this, is what you're hopefully going to see is some of them get confused. Like one of them will get rolled onto its back and not be able to navigate. And once the turtle's on their back, they're as good as dead. But then there's another little turtle that kind of pops up, and in his trying to get out of that nest, he pops it over again, and he's on his way. And then sometimes there's sand dunes and human-made sand castles. We've done everything we can to preserve loggerhead turtles so they can do instinctively what they know to do, and that is to get to the sea. But even we humans have disturbed their natural path, their natural progression. We build these sand castles, and then the tides come up, and we build these big holes down on the beach, and the loggerheads will actually go in the holes. And sometimes they'll think they're in the sea. They'll stop. They'll just think, well, I've arrived. But they haven't. That's not the sea. In fact, it's a cheap imitation for the sea. Or sometimes they'll get into a hole where someone has built a sand castle, and they'll just go round and round and round. They won't be able to find their way out of the hole. And they die literally in that hole, not going to where they were born to be. Now, if they get there, one of these 2-inch turtles can grow up to 600 pounds. That's like 3 of you big guys, 600 pounds. And they grow to probably 100 years old, so they live a long time. There are very few predators when they're in the sea. Sharks will bite at them, but they're able to sustain any kind of bite. And so they have a longevity of a life that's incredible. Only because at a very vulnerable time in their life, they listen to that homing signal that's deep within their spirit that says, water. Water, living water. So, I wonder how we are as humans. When I see that video of the turtles, I wonder, so how are we doing? Because what I know in reading the Word of God is that we're born with that homing system within our souls. In creation, it says that we were born in the image of God. We bear the likeness of God inside of us. And regardless of what we do in our lives, that likeness does not go away. And so even as a vulnerable at a young age, there's this kind of pulling that God has. It's almost this homing beacon that God is saying, return to me. Now when Travis read that scripture, this is about the Apostle Paul, and he was traveling, he went into Athens, and Athens was a big city. And it was an intellectual city. The philosophers, the theologians, they all gathered in Athens. This was the place, if you could figure it out, you could figure it out in your head. And so Socrates would have liked Athens, and he would have argued. And they had these wonderful debates. And normally the debates happened in what we call the agora. It was the marketplace. And so there might have been just a little corner in the marketplace that was very casual, and someone would have gotten up on this little platform and he would have said, I want to debate human life. I want to debate the meaning of our existence. And so people would gather around that wanted to debate, and he would be able to say, okay, this is what I want to debate. Well, Paul was looking around, and he was seeing this climate. and he started to see all these idols, all these sandcastles, all the divots, like that you're watching on the locker house. Paul's looking and he's saying, wow, they have a lot of statues here. Like everything that they need, if there's a statue if they need fertility, there's a statue. If they need food, there's a statue. If they need peace, there's a statue. There's a statue for everything. And they worship all these things. And I can imagine Paul's spirit, after just being with the living Christ, his spirit is just absolutely deflated. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, these people are worshiping everything and anything. And then he comes along on a side street, wasn't in a main street. He comes along and he sees this one statue. And the inscription on the bottom of the statue said, "It is to the unknown God." You see, Paul actually looked at this statue and went, wow, they have statues from A to Z. They have statues that covers everything in their life. You want a new job? That would be a statue. You want to have a baby? That's a statue. But why do they have a statue to an unknown God? And Paul started to think. And he realized that the reason they did is because they weren't sure they had covered all the bases. And when you're not sure you covered all the bases, what do? You buy insurance, right? When you're in an area that you're not sure, you buy a trampoline and your kids get up on the trampoline and you think, oh my goodness, now I'm seeing all these things that can happen with this trampoline, and you start to think, maybe I should buy insurance. And then the kids invite their friends over and you watch them get on the trampoline and then you say, I really need to buy insurance. And so that might have been the mindset of these Athenians, that they said, you know, just in case, we better have a statue to an unknown God, someone that we might have missed. Paul remembers that. And so he comes alongside, just like these turtles. He comes alongside and he watches what they're doing and he says, hey folks, could I have a talk with you about something I've seen? Now this speaks so deeply into who we are as church, so you've got to listen to this. This is incredible that Paul uses this method in how he's going to talk to a bunch of intellectuals. He could have gone in there and he could have said, folks, you know what, you've got all these idols and they have to go. They just have to go. They're wrong. I want you to knock them all down because my God needs to be your God. We do that sometimes, don't we? Like people come in church and we say, well, I'm sorry, you smoke? You're still doing recreational drugs? Yeah, that's not going to work in here. You better go clean up your life and get that because we don't do those gods. And oh, your marriage is a mess and yeah, but we don't do that either. See, we're all perfect. And we kind of convey that to people who come in the church. And we want to like knock down all those gods and all the things that they may have learned that may not be necessarily true. But we want to judge them and say, just get them out. Paul didn't do that. Here's what Paul did. He walked around in Athens and he said, hi, wow, you must be really smart. What a way to compliment someone. Wow, you know, you folks here, you're really thinkers because I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these statues that you've really thought this out. Like you're really thinking about what it means to live in this world and what the existence of life is. That's really great. You know, when I travel to cities, I don't see that a whole lot, but I see it here. I got your attention, don't I? Yeah. And so he starts by where they are, and he compliments them and says what he can say about them. These are people who think and they debate day in and day out. And so he starts to tell them that that's really cool. And they're saying, what's this babbler? Truly, that's what's in the scripture. What's this babbler doing, talking to us? But they start to listen. And Paul says, now I got to tell you that I saw one of your statues and I think it's awesome. He likes one of our statues. This is good. He might be one of us. He might be a true Athenian. And he says, I saw this statue in back alley and it says, to an unknown God. And they're like, yeah, we remember we put that up somewhere. We don't use that one too often, but it's there. We're not going to knock it down. We like that one just in case. Paul starts to talk to them. He starts to guide them. He starts to get them to start to listen to that homing signal that's inside, the same homing signal that that little turtle is listening to. And Paul says, could I talk to you about that unknown God? Because I think I know his name. Well, all of a sudden they look and they say, well, now wait a minute, this conversation is not for the agora, it's not for the marketplace. We have a place for this, and it's called the Areopagus. And this is kind of our formal debate. It was kind of like a mini coliseum, and that's where we really do our formal debate. So we'd like you to go there. Uh-oh. Because the problem is when you go there and you lose an argument, and they really think that it's not truth, you get stoned. Just say. So Paul has this kind of decision day that he says, am I going to go there? Like, do I really want to chance that? Maybe I want to stay in the marketplace and I'll just talk to whoever wants to talk. But Paul says, yeah, let's go. That would be great. And so he goes to this formal place, the Areopagus, and he stands in front of them and he unpacks his whole story. He unpacks the story of who Jesus Christ is. And some of them are getting angry and saying, well, does that mean all of our gods have to go? And Paul's like, well, you might want to take a look at him. Because this unknown God, he doesn't need all these shrines. He doesn't need you to do all these things. The unknown God is Jehovah. It's Jesus Christ. And out of that whole conversation, I would love to tell you at the end of that story that it was like the feeding of the 5,000. I would like to tell you that it was the Peter talking to the crowds, and just thousands and thousands of people went, I get it. I'm going to take all my idols at my little altar at home, and I'm going to put them away, and I'm going with this unknown God. I want to know Jesus. Nope. Maybe, what, 20 out of 100 might have believed? No. Maybe 10? No. Maybe 5? No. Most of them walked away, and what we find out in the book of Acts is 2 people. 2 people heard and responded to that homing agent in their soul, deep calling to deep. 2 people responded and accepted Paul's message and became believers. 1 man and 1 woman. That was it. Paul put his whole life on the line. 2 people. 2 people. Now, if you're thinking like Paul, you would say, you know what, Paul, that the averages, it's just not in your favor. Go where you can do the most good. You could have been stoned for 2 people. And Paul would have stood here today and said, and I'd do it all over again. I would do it absolutely all over again because I have a story to tell, and I need to tell the story. I have to do what I know to do, and that is to go to the living waters. So how does it translate in our life? Well, let me tell you a story. There's a story about Dorothy Price, and she was listening to the radio on her way home from work, and she was going to stop at the store, and on the radio they were talking about kindness and how you're supposed to do an act of kindness for people, and you're not supposed to judge people. You're just supposed to love them and let the rest go. And so she got out of her, she was listening and she was getting ready to get out of her car and she was pulling into the grocery store and another woman just kind of came in front of her and wanted to cut her off. And all of a sudden Dorothy stopped and just let her go. Let her go in front of her. Instead of going, really? Which is what we typically do when someone cuts us off. She was like, you know what? This is my act of kindness. I'm going to let her go. So she gets in the parking lot and she goes to pull in. Have you ever pulled in and someone else is pulling in the other way? So you've got the empty spot you're pulling in, but all of a sudden you see someone pulling in and now you're playing chicken. And most of us are like, well, now I have to decide who's here first. And if I'm here first, I'm going to stay put and they're going to back out. But Dorothy, after hearing this on the radio, she thought, you know what? I need to back out. And so she backed out of the parking spot. And she went and she found another parking spot. Well, she got out to get into the grocery store, and this lady caught up with her, and she said, I have to tell you something. Dorothy looked at her and said, what? She said, that just never happens to me. She said, I'll pull in a parking spot, and it's always a case of, well, who's here first? And she said, you just willingly backed up and found another spot, and you were there first. And Dorothy said, yeah, I know. She said, well, what made you do that? And Dorothy said, well, actually, I probably would have done it, but I was listening on the radio, and this Christian radio station was telling me about how I really needed to be kind, and I needed not to judge. And so I just kind of wanted to pay that forward. and I want it to be kind. Well, the lady started to talk to her, and Dorothy found out that this lady was brand new in town, and she didn't have a church, and she had just moved, and she was trying to get her bearings, and Dorothy said, well, I have a church. Would you like to come with me? Because there's some great people, and really acclimate you to the community, and I could tell you about why I'm choosing kindness instead of just having my own way. And Dorothy said later, it really made a difference in her life because she was just hearing the homing signal. That she knew that she had to walk towards God. And as she walked towards God, someone else would probably notice and walk along with her. Now, we have a couple questions to ask ourselves. Because honestly, I think that if we don't live the God story in each of us, we won't have a story to live. Do you hear that? If you don't live the God story in each one of your lives, you won't have a story to live. You're going to find some place in your life where you're going to bottom out and you're going to say, you know, stuff has happened to me and I no longer have a story to live. I don't have anything of substance that I can actually live. So here are some questions. How's your directional system working these days? Are you so oriented, or are you lying on your back, floundering? Wondering, well, I'm a victim, Lord, and so I guess this is where I have to be. I'd like to maybe have a relationship with you, but look at all the stuff that's happened to me, and it's not my fault. It's not my fault that I ended up on my back. It's just life. It's how I was born. And I'd really like to look around and see that perhaps there's someone that might help me, but yeah, that's probably not going to happen. And so I'm just going to have to do it myself. How's your directional system? Are you living victimized? Or are you willing, by the power of God in you, to turn your life right side up and start walking? And then, do you know your purpose and your destination? Do you know where you're supposed to go? Or do all the sandcastles of your making and my making get in the way so that we don't get to the heart of God? We find our fame and money and our jobs and so much. We have to build houses and we have to mow grass and we have to do all this stuff. And so, Lord, worship you? Yeah, if I have time. But I have all these other gods that I worship. And so it's really hard, God, to make time for you. So if there's any time, I'll make time. And then, do you have to have all the answers before you step out in faith? If every one of those little loggerhead turtles had to know their destiny in life, if they had to know where they were going to end up, if they'd have to have it figured out, they probably would have stayed in the nest. Because the first probably year of their life is the scariest in all their lives. They're vulnerable not to the fish, not to the eels, although they do have some predators. Do you know what they're most vulnerable to? Aphids, bacteria, the small things in life that are going to eat them alive, that are going to damage their systems, and so they'll never make it to maturity. And then the next question, where have you erected sandcastles, obstacles in your life that someone else cannot find their way? Are you a person who is willing to take down sandcastles, or would you rather build them? So where do you need to drop the judgment and just help people in their journey? Where is it that perhaps you need to say, I have something that I can share with someone, and I'm willing to take the risk and the chance to do so that someone else's life can find Christ? Will you pray with me? Oh God, as we look at these baby turtles, they seem to do what comes naturally. In fact, sometimes human help disorients them. They listen to their God Spirit, and they know that their direction is to the sea. Lord, when you created us, you placed within us your Spirit. You made us in your image so that we would always ache to return to you. And so help us to remove the obstacles and the sandcastles in our own lives, that we might find our way to you each and every day, deeper and deeper. Let the waves of your grace wash over us to find forgiveness and grace, to live in union with you. And then, oh God, we ask that we would remove the sandcastles that we have placed in others' lives, so that when others see us, they don't see a clear image of Jesus within us. Help us to take the risk as Paul did, to have a story to tell, and live to tell the story. In your name we pray.